Hey there folks, so welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the newest album from Progenie Terrestre Pura called OltreLuna. So if you've been following along for the past couple of reviews, you've probably noticed that I've been more forgiving towards certain songs with tones and textures that call to mind a lot of sci-fi or space. Chilly, brighter synths, slightly alien effects, you get the picture. And if you saw my Star Set review a few months back, you know that I'm really fond of a lot of the sound, but also pretty damn critical when the acts don't really stick the landing to my high standards. But considering I do really like this sound and style, and I also tend to like black metal with more of an atmospheric or ambient touch, surely there would be something in this vein that came out fairly recently, like in 2017, that might catch my interest, right? So enter Progenie Terrestre Pura, and I'm almost certain I'm pronouncing that wrong, which loosely translates from Italian as Pure Sons of the Earth. They made a splash in 2013 with their debut UMA by blending in elements of ambient space rock with black metal. And while I wouldn't quite say it's among the best black metal that I've ever heard, some of the song structures didn't quite hit the same dramatic climaxes as I personally like in a lot of my atmospheric black metal. What I could translate in a lot of the lyrical content was indeed intriguing, exploring dichotomies between man and machines and where a soul might fit in between. And while I wasn't exactly wild about the more ambient electronic experiments of their 2015 EP Asteroidy, I wanted to check out their newest album, described as a prequel to UMA, showing humanity at a more primal state and their search for the divine amongst the stars, leading to that test of that humanity. Or at least I hope that was what it's going to be, given that I was having a devil of a time finding any sort of lyrics, in English or otherwise. But hey, it's black metal, I can kind of work around that. Lyrics aren't the most important element in this genre, so what did I find on OltreLuna? Okay, well the good news here is that thanks to one of my followers, who I think originally requested this record back on Patreon, I actually did manage to get a scan of the lyrics in Italian, and I translated as much of them as I possibly could. So a lot of props and thanks in that department. I really do appreciate my fans here. And yet for all the work I put in so I could work to decode this album, kind of wish I liked it more than I do. Oh, don't get me wrong, it's far from bad. In terms of black metal, some of the most diverse and unique in terms of its sound I've heard thus far in 2017. And from what I can tell, it did execute its thematic progression pretty well, but there are some sonic and lyrical choices that hold it back from true greatness, at least for me. It's a good album, it does what it set out to do, but just didn't quite work for me when it comes to a lot of the sound. But the key to understanding this record's progression and its sonic choices actually starts off with a lot of the lyrical content and themes, which falls closer to a band like Epica in exploring high-concept existentialist questions and poetically bombastic language, because after all, this is metal. Granted, this is coming from a pretty rough translation on my end, so please forgive me there, but corroborated with some interviews, the basic arc of this record begins on an Earth-Zero vantage point, naturalistic and embracing organic textures and roots, but technologically advanced enough to look to the stars for something greater, be it finding more life in the wastelands of space or some higher plane of greater existence. And that journey into the blackness to find new planets or life among the stars advances the main question of the album. In order to find that higher power, greater integration with technology might prove necessary. And if that experience transcends the human flesh, the line between man and something potentially more evolved or advanced becomes kind of blurry. So what even is that element that makes us who we are? Are we bound only to the flesh? And if so, can technology further enhance that evolution? Or is there something greater to that human consciousness that further integration with technology could diminish it? Or is that greater consciousness transcended above whatever form we might take, spanning the gap between man and machine and then sanity be damned? Now, okay, these are not questions that are directly addressed by the writing on this album. Maybe it's an issue with some of the translation, probably is, but a lot of the lyrics read as a lot more impressionistic than directly philosophical, presenting enough of the questions but using language to suggest interpretations more than outright stating them. And the music also picks up a fair bit of the slack here too in describing and accentuating these themes. For while the album starts by integrating more elements of African hand percussion and flutes and even throat singing on the title track, as the record progresses, the more organic instrumentation gives way to heavier, more industrial synthesizers and even dubstep breakdowns. Although what's kind of interesting is that it never really feels all that that programmed or placed in lockstep. The synthesizer layers and some of the loops, they're more free-flowing as the surging tides of tremolo-pick guitar and cacophonous blast beats, with only a few incidents of triggered drums within the mix to imply that mechanical element. If anything, it almost seems to suggest that organic, chaotic human presence to a greater degree than most art exploring similar themes of mechanicalization, and that presence in the composition that will last all the way to the progressive liquid guitars that bookend Proxima-B. I kind of appreciate that the humanity transcends both the organic experience and the mechanical one. And there's a part of me that really likes that whole theme, the music naturally mirroring the thematic progression of the writing. And when you factor in the band bringing together the most aggressive riffing and guitar work of their careers in order to anchor that sound, even as the composition and percussion lines can recall elements of both death metal and even doom metal at points, I can't really deny that there is a virtuoso performance on display on this album. It really is quite impressive, especially some of the binaural stuff that they're doing. And yet, I wish it came together better for me than it does. And if I'm gonna point a finger at where the problems are, yeah, it's in the production. Say what you will about UMA, but when that album integrated a lot of its synthesizers in slightly higher tones, the progressions actively contributed or even drove parts of the melody. Whereas outside of specific cascading breakdowns on industrial passages on the back half of this album, the more synthetic layers and synthesizers they pile on top of the rhythm or the main guitar lines with a tinny insistence that certainly doesn't help the melodies already struggling for air. And that's before you factor in the less traditional instrumentation. It sounds like there's a saxophone that was added to one of the blast beat segments on the title track, and instead of contributing to a melodic interplay or any sort of solo, which would kind of be welcome on a black metal album and be defiantly different, it feels like additional texture for a mix that's already overstuffed with that texture. And I get it that not all space-leaning metal has to sound so expansive or empty, but considering how often the blast beats and the cacophonous cymbals just hang in the mix, you would think that the band would give that lead guitar a little bit more room to breathe, or allow their bass grooves to pick up a little bit more momentum to support the rhythm guitar. But momentum as a whole on these tracks feels pretty haphazard. The crescendos really get the breathing room or space they need to intensify that tension. The mix often shudders in moments of quiet before jerking back into gear. It's kind of awkward. Both Planeta.Zero and subLuce, they have these fast-picked melodic codas that really could have used the expansion. They were actually kind of nice. I would have preferred those guitar lines driving the songs. But then you have the drippy, half-assembled midsection of Deus.Est.Machina that goes entirely too long, all of it reflecting a usage of time that does nothing for the album's flow. And when you have multiple songs over the 11-minute mark, that flow, that balance, yes, it matters. And contributing to all of this is the main vocal line, which is nearly always insulated in a thick layer of distorted fuzz that feels both gratuitous and kind of thematically questionable. After all, if you're gonna show humanity slipping into technology as the record progresses and they venture out into space, wouldn't you want to reflect that in your main vocal line beyond just the symphonic backing touches and throat singing that just kind of go away entirely on the back half? The layer adds more texture to further clash the main guitar line, and without a firmer low-end bass to really add a lot of muscle to the rhythm guitar, it leads to a really cluttered mix on a lot of these songs that doesn't have that much melodic character. There's a lot of stuff going on, there's a lot of intensity, but it doesn't really modulate in the same way. Or to put it another way, man, I really wanted to love this album because it does a lot right. Big existential philosophy set in space with huge black metal riffs and diverse instrumentation that fits even thematically. This should be right up my alley, and for the most part it is. But the production and execution of some of these ideas just didn't really click for me, and the whiplash transitions reflect a lot of ideas, but not always enough to temper and refine them into more of a cohesive flow. Now, I definitely see why this record will have its fans, which is why I'm giving this a light 7 out of 10. I'm also going to recommend you check this out, if only because I know fans of more technical or maybe math rock inspired composition will find this pretty damn potent. But for me, it's a fascinating journey. I like the ride, I'll say that. I just wish I was more on board with it. That's all. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know, late getting to this album, this took a while to get up on Patreon. I'm happy it finally got there. If you want to buy the album, links in the description below. I also got the poll up there for more fans of this style, black metal. I'm curious where you guys fall on it. I know it's pretty frenetic and furious, but I think some of the transitions just didn't quite click for me the same way that, let's say, the Fen album did this year. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation? If you guys want to get involved in recommending more albums for me, make sure this stuff gets up the schedule faster, link to my Patreon right there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week you guys get to add records or even movies to my schedule if you're in the higher tier. More details right there, but till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.